Hello everyone, and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been with RICS for nearly 12 years now. I sit within the knowledge practice area of RICS, and my role is to look at the impact of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. And with over 110,000 qualified members working right across the property life cycle, from land, planning, development, construction, brokerage, valuation, finance, building operation, end of life. It's an incredibly broad canvas upon which data and technology is having a very profound effect. And indeed, our members work across a whole range of asset types: land itself, commercial, residential, alternative assets and infrastructure. So once again, a huge backdrop in which data and technology is having huge opportunities and also presents some risks that we need to manage as well. And today I'm really glad to have Ed and Dylan join me from Hicomply. So please do join me on the call. Hi Ed, hi Dylan, great to have you on the call. It's always great to perhaps start before we get into the kind of bits and bytes and the kind of details of the kind of data and tech world, to have a bit of a backstory from you both and a kind of an origin story from Hicomply. So please do introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about Hicomply and how it came to be.
All right, Andrew, really great to be on the webinar with you. I'll kick off and then hand over to Dylan. So yeah, I'm Ed Bartlett. I'm the CEO at Hicomply. And interestingly, my career started off in surveying. I'm a chartered surveyor going back to the early 90s. Spent my early part of my career working in building surveying practices, and got very much into the technology side of surveying. And that led to the formation of a technology business back in 2011, a business called Hicomply, which was a surveying application. And so, in fact, this is my second time as a tech affiliate with the RICS with a second product. So looking forward to that very much. Interestingly, my experience in the surveying industry and particularly developing technology in that environment was what led to Hicomply and the product we're going to talk about today. So what became apparent back in, say, 2012-13 is that, bidding for big government infrastructure projects, and certainly looking to do business in the sort of global economy, it became increasingly clear that information security was going to be a key client requirement going forward. And we were bidding for a big technology contract, which ended up being one of the biggest surveying projects in Europe of its time. It was surveying the whole of the schools estate across the UK, maybe 300 surveyors, 4 different firms working on it. And the requirement for that project was that everybody had the highest information security accreditation possible. And it was time consuming, pretty expensive to get in place. We got there and we were able to bid for that work, but off the back of that, we realized that there was probably another product to help customers, clients in that area. So we parked that idea. We went on a journey with Hicomply, but back in 2019, we circled back on this idea, and Hicomply was born from then. And Hicomply is a product that solves that challenge. It's a software platform that helps businesses manage information security and get the important security certifications in place that clients today just require. So yeah, looking forward to discussing it further. I'll just hand over to Dylan.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, so I'm an account executive here at Hicomply. So I manage our clients all the way up to the point that they sign with us, and then we pass them over to our very capable customer success team. Now, I'm on the call today because I am the sector lead for real estate and property. My personal experience in the industry is that I have a master's degree in civil and structural engineering from Newcastle University. So actually joining Hicomply was a really nice way to kind of blend my love for a process approach and also the clever use of technology with a bit of engineering as well. So yeah, that's me really.
Thanks, Dylan. And I must admit, it's always nice to hear when a technology company has that mix of tech skills and also knowledge of the domain itself, the built environment, because it is for better or for worse, it has its idiosyncrasies and its own nuances, doesn't it? And on that basis, actually, it'd be interesting to sort of discuss really, because obviously people think that generally, obviously, information security is important for every kind of business now, and in many respects, the kind of people out there trying to hack in and gain access to some extent are almost kind of don't mind which kind of organization it is, as long as they can break in and make some money or cause some damage. So what, in your view, is the particular importance to surveying and property firms for information security and certification?
Sure. So interestingly there, you've touched on what the kind of traditional view of the industry is, in that people want to protect their data from a position of fear. So they don't want to get fined or be held to ransom for data breaches, things like that. Reputationally as well, it's important to protect your own data and the data of your clients. But where we see the industry now is that, unlike that dialogue of negativity, we see information security as a real positive. So across any industry, but particularly in surveying and construction, these kind of certifications can help you win more tenders. Often people are going to be asking specifically around your Infosec credentials, and ultimately, if they're weighing up a competitor that has very similar attributes to yourself, but you are ISO 27001 certified, then are they really going to take that risk and go for someone that isn't certified? So while it does help to protect against all of those fear factors that I mentioned, it's also a really useful tool to expand your business, and that comes into the day-to-day operation as well. So often you'll have to submit security forms to win that kind of business, and with ISO 27001, often that is enough, rather than going through and spending a day or so filling out a form. You can just hand over a certification and then you're ready to go. It just streamlines the process and just stands you in a better stead over your competitors as well.
And given how sort of arguably fragmented and huge differences in size of companies within the property sector, given that the full life cycle that they work over, what's your sense of how the kind of property sector is currently implementing information security at the moment?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I look at sort of where prop tech and some of the surveying technology was maybe 10 years ago, and it's sort of, in information security we're probably roughly 10 years back. I don't think it's necessarily just the property sector. I think it's across the board, but I think we do see the property sector has been a little bit slower to sort of move in this area, and I think it's because, rightly so, they've been focused on other things. The last 10 years, it's all been about efficiency, looking at technology to make teams more efficient, deliver a better product. But I think what's happened, obviously, with the risk levels rising and the increase in the fear factor, as Dylan mentioned, I think there's been a transition to, like, actually, it's about, we've introduced a lot of data-driven technology systems, processes, but maybe we haven't really locked those down and protected those in the way that need to be. And so what we're seeing today, traditionally, most organizations are probably doing something about it, but they're using email, Word, Excel, standard storage solutions. They're very much using the office tools that you use for day-to-day business processes. And I think that's fine if you focused on doing the basics around privacy and protecting private data. But I think Infosec is become much more than privacy. It's become a much more of a business-wide issue. I think what we see, we talked particularly in the property sector, the questions that the customers are asking us is like, where should this sit in the hierarchy of need, but also priority. And I think Infosec probably was about 15 on the list, maybe even a year or two ago, whereas I'd say now it's probably number 2 or 3. You know, finance, people, you know, maybe, you know, ESG and environmental issues might be up there alongside it, but it's in that sort of top 3 or 4 business critical things to get right. And a lot of businesses, because the tool sets they're using maybe haven't caught up. So, you know, example, they might have policies and procedures in place for things like access control or password security, but they're probably not really enforcing them and keeping them alive. That, you know, that it's policy for policy's sake rather than embedded in the business operations. Businesses know that they're sitting on really valuable information assets, but in many cases don't even know what they have or where they are or where they're stored or which ones are more valuable than others. And linking to that, you know, what are the risks associated with those information assets? You know, I speak to, you know, a lot of surveying property businesses and who generate a lot of business from, you know, on the online communities. And I said, what's the most valuable asset that you have? And you know, it's always, well, it's our people. And I said, well, yeah, but how do you win your business? The people are the delivery mechanism, but your website, you know, your online content is actually the window, is the shopping, it's the front door, it's the shopping, you know, it's a shopping entry point, if you like, for your products now. And it's that transition to actually our assets now, our information assets need to be protected. And so that at the moment we see there's probably not a realization that those assets need to be protected, that, you know, risk assessments need to be done and managed. And, you know, when incidents happen, I think it's a pretty common, again, I wouldn't pick on property here, but I think because of the nature of property businesses being people dispersed and, you know, in the office, out the office, on client sites, you know, there's a lot of traveling, a lot of information flowing from different systems, from iPads to computers to networks to, you know, there is just the nature of that infrastructure of data moving around. There are more points, risk points where things can go wrong. And so where incidents do happen, I think it's fair to say the incidents aren't being managed necessarily very well, and that is something that is, you know, we're going to probably touch on it later in terms of the RICS and rules of conduct side of things. You know, what a client's expectations are and what the industry expects, you know, of us as property professionals is to really take care of customer data. And I think if you ask most businesses and, you know, and ask for their, you know, risk-based opinion, you know, are they doing enough? And I think most businesses would say probably not enough. There's more we can do here, but let's build on the positive. We're doing something, but we can do more, and we can improve that.
So from the perspective of what Hicomply is doing, ironically, you're using technology to solve a technology problem. How's that work? What's your technology doing to solve these info security problems?
So our system is what we call an ISMS. It's a phrase I'll probably be using a lot throughout this call, but that's an information security management system. And really a key benefit is that our system covers all areas of compliance, all within one platform. Now, Ed touched on the kind of fragmented nature of a lot of data, and that is true for a lot of industries. But having that all in one place is the first step towards organizing it and staying on top of it. And within our platform, that includes a scoping tool to understand what it is that you want to cover, all of your assets, risk management, all your policies and procedures as well, all the way through to an internal audit tool. So all of your compliance needs can be managed within the system. And then secondly, a big thing that our customers love is that we have done about 90% of the work for you. So that's always a bonus that our customers love to hear, and that is because we have preloaded the system with a lot of the information that you will need already, and that includes policy templates that come largely written for you. But then we've also built in some automated processes as well. So that feeds in and makes your processes more efficient. So that leads into what we've already done for you. While we do most of the work, there is that little bit that the customer has to do for themselves. And I suppose where our system is really useful in that, firstly, is our expertise. Now, a lot of that is built into the platform. I mentioned policies earlier, and they come written by our own master lead implementers, really are world-class documents. And then our support team as well. They're brilliant, and they are well versed in all of these kind of certifications. And the important thing we see with that is that anyone, regardless of their experience with information security or these kind of certifications, because of that expertise we've built in, they can do that without any troubles, and we're always on hand to help. And then just on the actual platform itself, it is a really interactive and connected system. So anyone, and especially in industries like construction and surveying, we like to use things that are connected and everything be in the right place when we need it. So whether that comes down to mapping of information security controls or some of the integrations that Ed has touched on earlier, we want to make the process as easy as possible. And yeah, would invite anyone that wants to come have a look at our platform to come do so.
Because I guess that's one of the challenges we do come across when I talk to both property firms and the tech suppliers, is that there's so many products out there that people are using now that there is this challenge around integration, making sure that you don't end up with yet another solution that doesn't talk to the other ones. How do you work with that? Because, to use the kind of phrase, the tech stack, you get these multiple systems, and you can almost end up worse off because you've got multiple systems that don't talk to each other, and you've really then sort of gone backwards to an extent.
Yeah, and Andrew, I think that's a really critical point. I think, and I think certainly my experience with other technology in sort of property space, there's no point having a point solution that's very good at what it does that doesn't talk to the things that you're using. And I think you're absolutely right. I think we hear that. I think the phrase that is often used is like indigestion. It's just there's too much tech to digest, and it can be a problem. And I think it also is the one thing that stops somebody in a business who's identified a problem. They spot a piece of technology, and it's the one thing that gets asked now when it gets taken to the board for approval. Is like, well, yeah, it's well good, but does it hook into these other things that we're doing? The IT person was saying, well, that's great, but does it link to our help desk? The HR manager will be saying it's great, but it has to link into our HR platform, and so on. So we've definitely taken a view that we're not the most important piece of technology in a business's stack, if you like. And I think what's happened with this sort of technology is probably similar to what happened with accountancy or CRM technology maybe 10, 15 years ago. So from the start, we've looked at integrating into the most common business tools that people use. So the most common one, in fact, is HR platforms, because with information security, one of the biggest risks to manage within a business, and again, this is very relevant to property firms with large teams, people who are on, again, not always sat in an office. They're in different working environments. Just the simple process of onboarding and offboarding staff, getting equipment to people and making sure that people are properly aware of the policies that they need to adhere to and work to. So one of our integrations is we've got a off-the-shelf integration with probably 15 or 20 of the leading HR platforms that people use, and it does simple things like it will pull all the users across. It will build an organization chart where you can determine who's got responsibility for what in terms of security. So that's the big one. Probably the next biggest one that we see is around task and project management. So We link a lot across to project management tools like Asana, task management tools like Slack and Microsoft Teams and other things that you would use. So, it's all well and good having processes around security happening on another platform, but if it's not giving alerts and notifications into your calendar and into and giving updates to project management tools that things have been done, they become the two worlds never meet. So that's a really key focus. I mentioned help desks. That's a really important one. Most businesses now, even if they're not a tech business, most property firms, worked in help desk environments serving their clients, but also have those looking internally into their business. If you need to order a new laptop in a company, you have to raise a help desk ticket. It's just, everybody has them now. So we link into all the leading help desk ticketing incidents platforms. And the important thing about that from an information security point of view, and looking at some of the standards that we've mentioned, is the fact that you can demonstrate and collect evidence that you're doing those things, and you've got the audit trail. That's really the critical thing in getting the certification. It's not having a policy around onboarding staff and doing that securely. It's actually then having the evidence that you've done that. So a lot of the evidence collection is critical to this. So a lot of it is about pointing at solutions and just gathering the evidence that's needed. But then there's other simple things like single sign-on and authentication and all those other things. So we have maybe about 75 sort of deep integrations with those sorts of platforms, but we've also integrated with a really neat product. You've probably come across it, Andrew, a product called Zapier, which is a sort of piece of middleware that you can do. They're called Zaps, where you can set up triggers. If this happens, that happens type thing. So with that, you can integrate into thousands of other applications. So got lots of options for integration, but I think the one that is reoccurring is the HR people side of it, and I think that highlights where the opportunity is here, because I think when you think of cyber and you think of Infosec, you probably think of the technology that's on your network, or things that are under the hood, stopping things getting in or getting out into your actual tech infrastructure. Whereas the reality of Infosec is it's much more about business process, and it's about people. And I don't like the phrase that sometimes people talk about people being the sort of weakest link. They're not the weakest link if they're properly trained and supported and have got the tools to do their job. They're actually the most important part of your information security sort of ring of protection, if you call it that. And I think that's again the positive side of this is, don't persecute your staff for making mistakes. Enable them and help them and support them to become, it's really pushing information security down through the business. So it's not just the CTO or the head of IT who's responsible for it. Actually, everybody has a part to play, and I think that's the businesses that are succeeding in this space are the ones that are sort of pushing this down and getting whole business buy-in to what they're trying to do.
No, you're right.
Just jump in on that as well. Yeah. Just to kind of summarize those integrations, actually we're trying to help our customers achieve compliance as you work. So a lot of those integrations enable our customers to use systems that they're already using and to have that feed into Hicomply and to feed in their compliance without them even necessarily knowing about it. So the more that we can integrate and the less time people actually have to spend on their compliance, the better for us. If they're just going about their daily processes and that feeds into the evidence that they'll require for their certification, then the less work, the better, right?
Yeah, effectively it should just be part of the plumbing, shouldn't it? Just be, it's in the background doing that sort of thing. Thinking particularly of our sector, the built environment, what sort of property companies are you typically working with now?
So we do work with a range of property companies, from surveying firms to people that use technology products within the industry. So things like customers such as Apreo, for example. But then more broadly, we have customers like Bellrock in facilities management, and even people that use tools that are used by maybe owner operators and investors, as well as other types of technology as well. So prop tech companies that feed into the industry. Essentially, it's anyone that has an appetite for streamlining their Infosec processes. So our system is widely applicable. But yeah, they're just a couple of examples of typical customers in the industry.
Yeah, it is interesting, Andrew, that most of the early conversations we had in this sector was with other technology companies working in the property sector. And I think that's because they were the sort of first wave of interest, because they were being asked, property clients who are using that technology were maybe unsure about, if they're going to, for example, if you're going to use, a surveying application that your whole team's out on site collecting data, are you sure that is a secure, is it being set up in the way that your clients are going to be expecting it to operate, whether you're, out there doing valuations in estate agency or doing building surveying, you need to know. And so a lot of the tough questions were going to the technology companies initially, but I think that's it's flipped on its head a little bit. I think we're now seeing sort of the property companies, surveying companies are getting asked those same questions by the property end clients, owner operators, particularly coming from the finance, any finance and investment community. So any property firms working in particularly finance or capital intensive industries where particularly insurance backed investment or real estate funds of any form, that they are pushing that requirement down. And one of the companies that we're working with is connected to a property company was acquired quite recently by a major property fund. And as part of that acquisition, there was a requirement to introduce certain information security protections as part of the deal. So it's becoming a case of if we're going to buy your business or buy your technology, the due diligence processes are quite intense around this now. And if they spot that a company maybe hasn't got something in place, they are forcing that to happen within 3-6 months or whatever it might be. So I think it's definitely moving up the sort of food chain in the industry, if you say that. And I think and again, it's become an international story as well. It's not, it's very much not just a UK picture.
No, just I suppose it's interesting. I suppose it's almost a supply chain issue, isn't it? You've got effectively going down the supply chain where people are being asked to provide their credentials in that sense. And I guess it's a very healthy thing that property firms who've begun to use technology from an outside vendor recognise that they should be asking those questions, that they should be expecting that level of protection when they're using a technology vendor. I mean, are there any kind of lessons we can learn in terms of take up of this kind of approach from other sectors and markets, beyond the property sector, to give us an idea of perhaps where we're heading and what the direction of travel is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd look at finance. I've mentioned finance just before as a good example. So and this, if you look at what's happened with fintech, the whole sort of breakdown of the banking infrastructure and the technology that's come into it, that has seen a significant sort of, and again, some of that's driven by sort of governance and sort of financial control, sort of coming from sort of financial governance bodies, but it's also coming from the fact that there are significant risks in just banking application and access to cash, and whether it's all the different ways in which you can access cash now and spend. The way you can spend and access cash is just it's ballooned out of exponentially in the last 2-3 years. So I think what's happened in fintech in that space, and I think I'd see property following, we're probably maybe 18 months behind the journey that finance has seen. We've sort of seen it with retail. I think retail was a very early mover in introducing certification like PCI and DSS, which was all about financial control of transactions of cash, right the way through to cash machines in retail facilities and that sort of thing. So I think retail was an early mover, but we're seeing that it's sort of spreading beyond just the payment gateways. It's becoming much more about protecting privacy data, and we've worked with companies in retail who maybe e-commerce, online marketplaces, that sort of thing, and they're storing potentially personal data, quite sensitive data about people's buying habits and addresses, names, bank details, you name it, across and potentially millions of customers. So they've really sort of locked in on that area. Probably another interesting one is healthcare. We're seeing the healthcare sector. You probably remember about 2-3 years back, there was some serious problems in the health sector with cyber incidents, and the healthcare industry was almost shut down at one point. So they've responded, and healthcare sector's actually developed its whole healthcare specific information security framework called the DSPT, and that's very much focused on patient data and protecting patient data. So it's interesting. You've got a real mix. Healthcare has developed its own thing because it was under attack. Fintech has sort of gone with the leading standards and in industry standards that are out there, and retail's done its own thing to a certain extent. We haven't seen anything specific come to light, that's property focused as such, and I do think that might happen. But and a good example of that is the automotive industry. So the automotive industry, all the leading players in that market, the big car manufacturing businesses, clubbed together and said, okay, we really like some of the industry sort of processes that sit under ISO 27001, which is the global standard, but they wanted some specific things built into that, specific controls as we call them, that are relevant to the automotive industry. So they developed their own approach, which is called TSAX. But TSAX sits on the ISO framework, but it's basically they see ISO as the standard, but they want things that protections in place that are specific to the automotive industry. So I suspect that's what's going to happen in property. I think the property industry is starting to realize that it has some of its own individual challenges, and particularly if you look at some of the issues that have occurred around transaction and deviation of capital in the real estate state agency market, and some of the real issues there. I think there probably is need to customize, but my recommendation is not to reinvent the wheel, and maybe to build off something that's already there, but maybe personalize it to the needs of the property sector.
So on that sort of
as well, sorry to interrupt. Ultimately, we see a world in the not too distant future where in a lot of these industries, certifications like this could well be mandatory. Now, we're already seeing steps towards that in the education sector, and I think that just shows the kind of forward-thinkingness of a lot of companies that we work with to get these things in place before they become mandatory. And I know we don't want to discuss all the fear factors again, but in the education sector, we're seeing a lot of data breaches happen, and you can see why they've made that move towards implementing these kind of certifications. But ultimately, the certification is applicable across a range of sectors, and the uptake across all is growing more and more so as these security concerns are increasing.
So, I mean, could I probe a bit more deeply on the certifications that are available? Because we've obviously talked about 27001, but are other certifications available, as the phrase goes, and is there something specific? You talked about not perhaps reinventing the wheel for the property sector, but is there a certification amongst the ones available that is perhaps most suited for surveying firms at the moment?
Absolutely, yeah. So ISO 27001 really is the gold standard of information security, and is a globally recognized standard that you can achieve anywhere, and it'll hold weight. Now, we also support a range of other certifications. One of the biggest ones that our customers are getting on board is SOC 2. And this is a very similar certification to ISO 27001, but we see that as being more popular in the American market.
Yeah.
So often people working in the UK and across the pond are getting both certifications, and our system has a lot of benefit in achieving multi-certification as well. We kind of map any of that overlap and crossover, because there is quite a bit of that between some of these standards. And as Ed touched on earlier, we also support certifications like PCI DSS, quality management as well in ISO 9001. We also have NIST framework arriving on the platform soon. But for those businesses that maybe aren't quite ready to go for certification, we also have a privacy module that supports with GDPR needs, and CCPA as well. But to be honest, in addition to the certification that we have bespoke frameworks for, our customers are managing a wide range of certifications in the system. So all sorts of ISO standards and a whole host of others are being managed on the platform at the moment. And that is because our framework is a pretty simple one and very easy to use, but because it's very robust and configurable in a number of different ways, it doesn't restrict you to the certifications that we offer a bespoke package for. You can always adapt the system to meet your needs.
Good.
Just jumping in on there, I think the one barrier that I've seen when I talk to directors and surveying firms, and things, we're in the middle of some tight economic conditions, and I think there's always a question about the cost and understanding. There's the cost of implementing an ISMS, but there is a cost associated with the certificate itself. That has to be done by independent third-party auditors. One of the things that we do really encourage is to think about having the ISMS on board within the business, and there's no real essential need to get certified straight away. So I'd always say, if there's financial concerns about the certification side of it, you can get a lot of benefit just by implementing the ISMS. And often when talking to customers, a phrase that we often see used is we're working towards ISO certification, or working to, and that in itself probably gets you 50%, 60% of the confidence factor that you need. So if you're not ready to push the button to get certified, implement the ISMS against one of those. And again, I would tend to agree with Dylan. If you're going to start with a certification, there are things out there that we didn't mention, like Cyber Essentials and things in the UK, but I think most surveying firms are operating in an environment where you need that wider framework. Maybe Cyber Essentials is good to a point, but it maybe doesn't give you that layer. And it's worth mentioning the ISO 27001 standard has just been updated just back in October of this year, which we've now pulled into the platform. The new version of that is phenomenal in that it's widened its scope, but it's simplified. I think they recognised that it was maybe a little bit clunky in a few areas, and it's got a much better privacy layer in there now, and they've simplified the controls, and they've simplified a few things. So the new standard, the new version of the ISO standard is, I think, one that I would recommend to businesses in the property sector. But like I say, I do think the property sector does need to think about maybe what's specific to them. And we do have property clients who are already moving in that direction and looking ISO, but they're saying, look, I want to add some additional controls because we're working with businesses in sort of property, but in the property/finance market, call it that. They're fintechs, but heavily working in maybe working markets where there's significant, some of the capital market solutions where you're transferring a lot of capital backwards and forwards. In that environment, you do want to have additional controls in place that you might not need to have if you're a 5-person building surveying practice, out of Leeds, who you just need to make sure you've got the essentials to cover that scope of your business. But if you're deep in the finance world, you might need to add additional things in. So I think it's all about getting the scope right and making sure you set up your framework suitable at a level that's suitable for your business.
Indeed, and thinking about kind of standards from an RICS perspective, as you know, we have our rules of conduct, and one of the areas that focuses on that is that security of client data. How could you help RICS firms with that quite specific part of our rules of conduct?
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever I'm talking to a property company, particularly an RICS firm, I'll have my copy of the rules of conduct 2021 version, and I've got three parts of that highlighted in yellow. Yeah. Clause 1.9, clause 3.5, and 3.12. I know them by number, but it is right there in rule 1. Protecting confidential information. Not disclosing that for purposes it's not provided. But I think when you go beyond that into the rules of conduct, it does start to sort of open up some of the things we've talked about today. Yes, there's protecting client data and the personal information, privacy related, but it's also talking about managing your business with due care, skill, and being up to date in terms of industry best practice. And I think what we're talking about here, is about that. It's that sort of due care and skill. If you're managing a bit, as a director of a business, are you performing all your fiduciary duties? Are you making sure that your business is operating and managing risk in the way you should be? And I think that links into that whole thing around keeping information secure and safe on behalf of your customer. But I think it's more than that. It's about are you doing everything you should be doing? Have you done the due diligence on what is best practice, and kind of bit of innovation coming into focus here. And I think we can help address those specific rules of conduct pieces, but I think it's more about understanding the risks that a business has. And if someone said to me, we're a small company, this seems very complex, what can we do in terms of an ISMS? Just doing 3 things, just creating your digital asset register and doing the risk assessment on those assets and putting in place the basic policies and procedures into your business. Just doing that would give you an 80% improvement in information security posture, as we call it. It would just give you something that would set you apart from other firms potentially. And we're in increasingly competitive markets, and Dylan mentioned the point before. If you're head to head with a business that's got the same equal offer, maybe comparable on fees, you're there or thereabouts, but what's going to differentiate? I think this is where I think we're heading. But probably the other thing to say is it's not. I think certainly when early part of my career, I worked in businesses, surveying firms that were doing 9001, which is obviously around quality and business process. And I always got the impression that was maybe often perceived to be something you did, and maybe you didn't. You got it and you put it on the shelf, and you maybe you pulled it back down before your annual audit, and you got yourself sorted. Whereas now the information security side of this is an ongoing thing. It's a collaborative thing. It's there's tasks and things that have to be done monthly, quarterly, 6 monthly, annually, and the certification life cycle, as we call it, is quite hard. It's quite difficult to keep on top of if you're not managing things in between. So, something like ISO 27001, it's a 3-year life cycle. You go for certification. You have an annual health check audit, if you call it that. But in between that, you have to collect the evidence around that. So, our advice to property firms is, if you think, putting that sort of mechanism in place, if you've got concerns about, am I meeting, the expectations of what a surveying firm should do, coming back to the rules of conduct, it addresses all the things that the rules of conduct is asking for in terms of that, care, skill, diligence, the evidence and the demonstration of the business taking that seriously. So, not only are you going to get customer interest and build business, but it should be a way of giving you confidence that you're doing what you need to do to keep the sort of, to be right on the conduct and governance piece, as well as keep your customers happy as well.
I mean, a final thought from you both. How long would it typically take a surveying firm to implement this? Because clearly there are various drivers that we've discussed, and as you say, it may indeed be a journey to full certification. But how quickly can a firm begin to implement these and use a platform like yours?
It's a good question, and it's one I love sharing the answer with our clients, because we do save them a lot of time. Just for some context, using traditional approaches, things like Excel and SharePoint and other kind of office tools that are a bit fragmented and not really built for purpose, would take anywhere between 18 and 24 months. And we have heard some horror stories of it taking significantly longer than that as well. But using our system, we would expect, as a conservative estimate, for people to get certified in between 3 and 6 months. Now, we've had clients that get certified in as little as 6 weeks. And while we wouldn't expect that for every customer, it just shows the power of the software itself, in that you can drive it forward and achieve that certification in line with your timescales. And actually, when I speak to customers, often they'll come to us and they're a bit panicked. They might have a deadline that their boss has given them, and often that deadline massively exceeds what we would expect people to get certified on the platform. So ultimately, delivering things on time is important to any industry, but particularly across construction and surveying and things like that. So the amount of time that we save our clients is a really big factor.
Yeah, I think, just to pick up on that, coming back to what I was mentioning before, I think the most important thing is to make a start at some level. And if that big tender drops on your desk that has got a horrible set of security questions to answer, if you're in play and you are working towards it, you can share. We've got customers who buy our platform because exactly that's happened. They're in a tender process and they've been asked to provide an example of a policy or procedure that they need. So you can get a quick win almost immediately, but obviously, because it's a regulated certification, and again, the audits have to be done by third-party accredited firms. But I think one of the things that's I think helped speed up that process, and interestingly, we talk a lot about what's happened in the last couple of years and off the back of the pandemic. Actually, in this world, what happened there has actually helped. There's one positive in this, and that up until probably a couple of years ago, a lot of the accreditation bodies weren't very happy about audits and certification being done. On the concept of doing it remotely was almost non-existent. If you went through certification audit, somebody would come to your office, You get your files out, you put them in the room, all your files would go in. One by one, the directors would go in and answer questions, and it was quite intense. Everybody would be nervous about whether or not they know where everything is. And whereas now it's done remotely, and and I think we customers invite the auditor into the platform. They can find what they need, and then they can request information through the platform. And the auditors are giving us really good feedback on that, and that in itself is creating some efficiencies in the process. And ultimately, it's an efficiency that's not a downgrade in the quality of what's happening. It's actually there's more of an audit trail. There's more transparency, if you like. So it's one of those time efficiency improvements that doesn't downgrade the outcome and the product, which I think, let's face it, sometimes you introduce technology because it's quickens things up or speeds things up, but the end result is maybe not as good a quality, or you have concerns about, well, was it worth doing it quickly because it hasn't, maybe I've missed something, or maybe something's been left behind. Whereas I think this certainly looks to address that. But yeah, Andrew, there's some really, I think it is the first. That's a good question, because that's probably fair to say, Dylan, that's the first question we get asked is, how long does this take? And can I get it done before the tender lands? But yeah,
I suppose as well, it's not always necessarily a question of timeline, but resources, some internal resources, in terms of how many people are we going to need to commit to this certification, how many days a week, these kind of questions. And with a system like Hicomply, it's great that the answer is, obviously it will range from business to business, but it's significantly less resources needed. Now, a lot of people starting out on their journey will think that they might need to get someone into a role specifically to manage the certification. And if you're doing that on Excel, SharePoint, things like that, then maybe you do. Actually, using our system and the fact that we can have unlimited users in the platform as well, you can really easily break up the project, and the overall work you need to do is significantly less. So it means you can tackle these things in-house with a lot less time, a lot less resource.
Well, that's great, and I guess for a sector that's, for better or for worse, is really embarking on a journey to digitize so many processes, this is only going to become more important for surveying firms, whatever they're doing. But for today, it's been fascinating to hear about what you've been doing and your background. But for today, thanks very much, and look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us.